Welcome to this brief tutorial which will provide an overview of the Scribe Online connector for ServiceNow. My name is Rich Rodacey, Training Manager here at Scribe Software, and joining me is TJ McDowell from Datix. Welcome TJ, and thanks for being here.
Thank you, happy to be here.
So, I thought we could begin this tutorial about, just explain a little bit about your background at Datix and specifically your role with regards to this connector project.
Sure. So I'm the Executive Vice President of Software Development at Datix, and my role in the connector build-out was I architected the solution and then also oversaw the development of the connector from my dev team.
Oh, okay. You think you could maybe start us off with a brief introduction as to what this connector is all about, and where does one get the connector, and who would be a typical user that would use this connector?
Sure. So ServiceNow connector is a connector for service tickets and incidents and things like that, and it is it's a fee-based connector that you're able to request and install from the Scribe Online marketplace, and then Datix will get you all set up with a subscription, and it's a really easy installation. You can be up and running in just minutes.
Easy is good, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And then we have integration developers or business analysts who typically are the end users.
Oh, okay. That's good to know. Now, are there special requirements for the configuration of the connector that an end user would need to know? And if so, where would that information be found?
Sure. So the only information that you need is really just a username and password that will be used for the integration user. And so that can be set up within ServiceNow, and then that really is the biggest piece that you'd need to be able to get everything all set up inside the connection screen.
That's fairly simple, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So, with the ServiceNow account, let's say it's in place, and we now want to establish a connection into the ServiceNow log, or I should say ServiceNow application, using the connector. The connection detail information is fairly important to be able to successfully connect into that. Mm-hmm. So can we talk just a little bit, maybe you can even show it, talk a little bit about what that connection information might look like?
Sure. And so having that username and password we just talked about, there really are not all that many other pieces of information required, but why don't I show you the screen and we can talk through a few of those connection properties.
That sounds good.
All right. So let me load up the information here, and as it's loading up, we'll see just a handful of fields here. The first one that we'll see is the service URL, and this is just the URL that you would go to access your ServiceNow instance. And then that username and password that we were talking about, as long as you have that integration username and password set up in ServiceNow, that will be all you need to provide there. The subscription key be granted by Datix at the time of this subscription setup. And then the table filter is actually a really useful feature that allows the user of the Scribe connection not to have to be overwhelmed by the thousands of tables that ServiceNow supports. So this kind of helps limit down what tables you see in your entity dropdown, and improves the usability of the being able to use this connector.
Great. So that's a great segue into the next portion of my slide here, and that is in regards to customization. I think you would agree, as well as our viewers out there today, that change management happens as a business grows. Things change internally, and that reflects back within the applications. Can you talk a little bit about how is the connector, how is it architected to be able to support that?
Sure, absolutely. So the ServiceNow entities that are present out of the box are automatically supported by the connector. And then in addition, any new entities that you would add or any packages that you would install on your ServiceNow instance, as soon as you do a reset metadata, those get pulled in as well, and you're able to use those freely.
And the reset metadata, that's within the Scribe Online application, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Correct.
All right, great. So up to this point, we talked about what the connector is, where you can get it. You had mentioned the marketplace within Scribe Online. And then we talked a little bit about some of the configuration requirements about the connector. So I was hoping that maybe this might be a good time to talk about some of the use cases. We're talking about the technology, but Where do you use it? How do you use it? And, what would be a typical example of that? Can you share that with us?
Sure. So we see the ServiceNow connector being used for things like incidents, cases, and requests to be able to, for an end user, to go in, submit those cases, and then for the cases to end up showing up in another system. Hopefully allow the facilitation of quicker response times and better incident handling.
Actually, yeah, and I think the efficiencies across the enterprise certainly improve when you've got that type of integration going on.
Right.
Good, good. All right, good to know. All right, so I was wondering, we talked about, maybe you can show a little bit?
Sure,
That'd be great.
absolutely.
All right.
Yeah, let me load that up and we'll look at the connector in use. All right. So what we'll be looking at here is we'll be looking at a task query to start off with. And so this would just be related to the task entity inside of ServiceNow. And I had mentioned being able to kind of filter down this list. This is a nice and short list here. It would be really long if we didn't have those connection parameters specified. But we're working with the task here, and we can do a preview on the data just to see what kind of information typically lives inside that task table.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And so it's pulled back a number of tasks it found in the system. And so, we see things like an approval, task number, whether the task is active, and of course being able to filter on all these is, something that we can do as well. But just kind of gives a lot of information about where that task is at and some of the details related to that. So then, in addition to being able to query a task, it's helpful to be able to create tasks from other systems. There may be another trigger that you have outside of ServiceNow where you would want to trigger a certain task to go on, be able to hand off tasks effectively to different individuals, or possibly even update the status of a task, or maybe even delete a task once it's completed.
Now, this is a relatively simple diagram, a mapping diagram, if you will. But I'm sure it can be as complicated as the use case requires. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because I noticed that there's a lot of different control blocks over there on the left side of the screen where you can do, for each result and if then else, those types of things. So,
Right.
a lot of functionality. Great. Great. All right. Well, thank you for that, TJ. Let's go back to the PowerPoint and pretty much take us to the end of our abbreviated webinar today. I wanted to first off say thank you for taking the time to view this tutorial. And if you do have questions about the connector, its usage, maybe specifics about how to acquire it, anything that you've seen today that you may have some additional questions, certainly don't hesitate to reach out to us at the link that you see here on the screen, success.scribesoft.com, and post your question and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. So having said that, I'd like to say once again, thank you very much on behalf of TJ and myself. Appreciate you taking the time out of your schedules to watch this video. And we certainly hope that what we shared with you today will be of value in your usage of that connector. Thank you very much.